October 22, 2017 began like any other shift for a sanitation worker in Oregon. At a construction site on the outskirts of town, he was clearing discarded materials when he noticed two oversized bags meant for rubble. They felt wrong in his hands, too heavy, too rigid. Curiosity overpowered routine. He opened one. What he saw forced him to stagger back. Inside were human remains. That moment closed a 5-day search for a missing couple and opened the door to a far darker truth hidden among Oregon's quiet trees. The story traced back to October 17. Jessica West, 29, and her husband Thomas, 33, had chosen to step away from the noise of daily life and retreat into nature. They were drawn to trails, to stillness, to evenings warmed by firelight beneath open skies. Their destination was Lake Walport, a place wrapped in thick forest and guarded by lonely shorelines, peaceful, remote, untouched. They packed lightly but carefully, a tent, sleeping bags, simple food. Before leaving, they reassured family they would return before the week was over. The last sign of them came through Jessica's phone. A message from her sister arrived, containing a photo of Jessica and Thomas smiling at sunset, the lake glowing behind them. The words beneath it were simple: "It's incredible here. I love you." After that, silence. When Sunday came and went with no return, no calls, no replies, unease turned into fear. Both phones were unreachable. This alone was enough to alarm their families. Jessica and Thomas were never careless about staying in touch. Her sister contacted the Lincoln County Police Department to report them missing. The report was logged, but at first, urgency was muted. People disappear briefly all the time in wilderness areas. Signals fade. Schedules slip. But another day passed. Then another. Nothing. Investigators pulled phone records. The final signal from both devices placed them near Lake Walport. After that, the phones went dark. The search began. The county sheriff mobilized teams, soon joined by local volunteers. The terrain worked against them: dense forest, uneven ground, miles of silence. The first solid lead came quickly: the couple's car, parked at a small trailhead lot. It was locked. Personal items remained inside. There were no signs of distress. Everything suggested they had arrived safely and headed out exactly as planned. Searchers followed the trails inward, calling their names into the trees. The forest answered only with wind and moving leaves. 2 days passed. Then 3. There was no trace, no backpack, no campsite, no ashes from a fire, not even the tent they had brought. The absence itself became disturbing. In most accidents, something is left behind. Here, it was as if their presence had been erased. Authorities reviewed every explanation. Wildlife was the first consideration: bears, cougars, but specialists found no blood, no torn fabric, no signs of struggle. And animals do not carry off tents. That theory collapsed quickly. Getting lost was next, yet Thomas was experienced and familiar with the area. They carried maps and a compass. Even disoriented hikers leave clues. None existed. The idea that they vanished by choice was considered reluctantly. Detectives examined finances, relationships, work life. Interviews led nowhere. No debts. No conflict. No secret plans. Everyone described the same thing: a grounded, happy couple with no reason to disappear. What remained was the most unsettling answer. Someone else had been involved. But who would strike in such isolation, and why? They carried nothing of value beyond basic camping gear. Robbery made little sense. Time dragged on. The forest yielded nothing. Hope thinned with every hour. Families waited in anguish. The story spread across local news, gripping Oregon with quiet dread. Then, on the 5th day, after the wilderness search had reached its limits, a call came that shifted everything. It didn't come from the woods. It came from an industrial edge of a nearby town, many kilometers from Lake Walport. A worker clearing trash reported something deeply wrong. Inside a dumpster, he had found a tent, carefully rolled, almost respectfully placed. It stood out immediately: good equipment isn't thrown away. Beside it lay several large construction bags. One was impossibly heavy. When he tried to lift it, he understood that what lay inside was never meant to be found. A mix of curiosity and dread pushed him to slice through the thick plastic. The moment it opened, terror burst from his chest in a scream. Authorities arrived within minutes. The construction zone was sealed off, lights flashing against concrete and steel. Forensic teams carefully unfastened the remaining bags. Inside lay a man and a woman. Both bore unmistakable signs of a violent end. Identification came quickly, and with it, confirmation of everyone's worst fear. Nearby, investigators found a tent. It was the same one the missing couple had taken with them. There was no longer any doubt. The bodies were Jessica and Thomas West. What had begun as a disappearance was now officially a homicide investigation. And with that shift came heavier questions. Who had ended their lives? And why were they transported so far from the forest where they were last seen? Even the way the bodies were handled felt unsettling. They hadn't been abandoned carelessly in the wild. They were wrapped, contained, moved with intention, and discarded at a landfill. This wasn't panic. It was calculation. The presence of the tent beside them deepened the mystery. Whoever did this didn't merely kill them, they erased their campsite, as though attempting to wipe their existence from the forest itself. Investigators were forced to reset their approach. The construction site became the new focal point. Who moved freely through this place? Who could unload heavy bags without drawing attention? Detectives began systematic interviews: laborers, security staff, truck drivers. The list grew long, overwhelming. Each name carried possibility. Yet no one imagined then that the truth, when revealed, would feel both disturbingly ordinary and profoundly horrific. Answers began to emerge from the autopsies. The medical examiner established that both Jessica and Thomas died from gunshot wounds. The attack had been swift, merciless. Death likely came on the night of October 17 or early the next morning, precisely when contact with them was lost. Their bodies showed no evidence of a prolonged fight. This was an ambush. They never saw it coming. Ballistics revealed the bullets came from a common handgun. It offered little direction, except one critical fact: the killer was armed. Police were no longer searching for an accident or a chance encounter. They were hunting someone who pulled a trigger. The investigation divided into two paths. One team stayed anchored to the construction site, replaying the last days over and over. Dozens were questioned again. Photos were circulated. Faces studied. Memories probed. But the site itself worked against them: machines roaring, trucks arriving and leaving, constant movement. In such noise, 2 bags could vanish into a dumpster without a second glance. Cameras at the entrances recorded endless footage. Car after car. Hour after hour. The work was grueling, almost futile. Whoever disposed of the bodies had chosen this place carefully, trusting that anonymity would be guaranteed by chaos. The second team returned to Lake Walport. The mission had changed. They were no longer searching for survivors, but for the place where life had been taken. Investigators scanned the forest floor for shell casings, blood, disturbed soil, anything. But the wilderness remained silent. Thick vegetation and fallen leaves swallowed secrets with ease. Grid by grid, the search continued. Nothing surfaced. No trace of violence. No remnant of a camp. The absence spoke loudly. The killer had removed not only the bodies, but nearly every sign of what had happened. This level of precision pointed towards someone familiar with the land, someone who understood how the forest hides what it is given. 7 days passed after the discovery of the bodies. And still, the truth waited, unseen, patient, and far closer than anyone realized. The investigation was stalling. The construction site had yielded nothing. The forest had given up no answers. There were no suspects, no direction, only silence. With options running thin, detectives made a deliberate decision to return to the very beginning, the small parking area where Jessica and Thomas's car had been left behind. If truth had been missed, it would be there. They began again, questioning anyone who might have crossed paths with the couple during those days. Other campers. Hunters. Locals walking their dogs. Most recalled nothing of importance. The forest, to them, had been just another quiet day. But one voice stood apart. An elderly man who regularly visited the area to observe birds remembered something small, but unsettling. On October 17, he said, he noticed a Forest Service vehicle parked near the lot. That alone wasn't strange. Rangers were a familiar presence. What lingered in his mind was the length of time the van remained there, and the sight of its driver, in uniform, speaking with a couple beside their car. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, in light of what had happened, it felt different. Wrong. He reported it. For the first time, the case shifted. A violent crime in the forest. A ranger nearby. Detectives immediately requested duty rosters from the forestry department for that sector and date. One name surfaced: ordinary, unremarkable, easy to overlook. Stephen. 42 years old. More than 15 years of service. No disciplinary record. Known as quiet, dependable, deeply familiar with the terrain. He lived alone, close to the park he patrolled. On paper, there was nothing alarming about him at all. Still, investigators followed the thread. They visited his home for an informal conversation. Stephen answered calmly. Yes, he confirmed, he had been working that area on October 17. When shown photos of Jessica and Thomas, he paused, just briefly, then said he recognized them. He claimed he had spoken to them near the trailhead, warning them about a section temporarily closed due to maintenance. After that, he said, he drove on and never saw them again. The explanation was reasonable. Too reasonable. Yet something felt off. He avoided the detective's eyes. His hands trembled faintly. It could have been nerves. Or something deeper. The officers chose not to confront him. They thanked him and left, but from that moment on, Stephen was no longer invisible. Quiet surveillance began. At the same time, investigators moved to secure a search warrant for his home and work vehicle. The evidence was thin: one witness, a moment of hesitation, a feeling seasoned detectives had learned not to ignore. Given the gravity of the crime and the absence of other leads, a judge approved the warrant. 2 days later, just after dawn, police returned. This time, with authority. The search of the house was methodical and exhaustive. Room by room, drawer by drawer. Nothing. No weapon. No blood. No obvious link to murder. Stephen sat in the kitchen under watch, saying nothing, his expression unreadable. Once again, hope seemed to fade. Only one place remained. His work truck stood in the yard, a standard Forest Service pickup. The bed was cluttered with tools, ropes, fuel containers. Ordinary. Forgettable. Then one detective noticed a large tarp tossed carelessly into a corner. Beneath it sat several bags of animal feed. Something about it didn't sit right. He pulled the tarp back. What lay underneath ended the search. 2 backpacks. 2 sleeping bags. A cookware pot. A portable gas burner. Mud-stained, worn, but unmistakable. The belongings of Jessica and Thomas West. In that instant, the truth snapped into focus. Stephen's face drained of color. His shoulders sank. No words were needed. For the officers, it was as close to a confession as silence could give. The man entrusted with guarding the forest, and the people who entered it, was taken into custody. As he was led away, one question echoed louder than all the others. Not how. Not who. But why? Why would a trusted ranger, a protector of the land, end the lives of 2 innocent visitors? The answer still waited, hidden, just beyond the edge of understanding. Inside the interrogation room, Stephen West sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the bare tabletop. The air was heavy with silence. Spread out before him were photographs, clear, undeniable images of backpacks, sleeping bags, and camping gear recovered from his work van. Proof without mercy. The detectives didn't raise their voices. They didn't threaten. They waited. The same questions returned again and again, delivered in even, almost lifeless tones. Why did you have their belongings? What happened in the forest? Where is the gun? Time stretched. Minutes blurred into hours. Then, slowly, something inside him collapsed. Stephen lifted his head. His shoulders sagged, as if the weight he had been carrying finally crushed him. And he spoke. What came out was not the confession of a deranged killer, but the unraveling of a fragile man whose fear spiraled into irreversible horror. Stephen admitted that for months he had been breaking the law. Using his authority and intimate knowledge of the wilderness, he identified valuable trees inside protected zones. He cut them down quietly and sold the timber to a small private mill. The money was good. The risk, he believed, was manageable. It was his secret, his way of clawing out a better life. He knew what he stood to lose, but greed whispered louder than caution. The forest was vast. Remote. He convinced himself it would hide him forever. On October 17, he drove into one of the restricted areas to retrieve another load of illegally felled wood. That was when he saw the tent. Jessica and Thomas were there. They had wandered off the main trail, unknowingly crossing into forbidden ground in search of solitude. The sight of them jolted him with sudden terror. His mind raced. Had they seen the stumps? The tracks? The evidence of what he had done? He approached them, forcing calm into his voice, hiding behind his uniform. He told them they were in a closed area and needed to leave immediately. According to Stephen, they reacted politely. They apologized. They said they hadn't noticed the warnings. They began packing up. Then he saw Jessica holding her phone, angled toward the trees. In that instant, fear distorted reality. To him, it wasn't a casual photo, it was documentation. Evidence. He imagined the chain reaction, police reports, investigations, his secret exposed. His job gone. His home lost. Courtrooms. Prison. The panic erased reason. He returned to them, sharper now, demanding the phone. Thomas stepped in, protective, confused. He asked what the problem was. They said they were leaving. They insisted there was no issue. Seconds later, the forest shattered with gunfire. When the echoes died, Stephen stood alone among the trees, staring down at what he had done. The panic burned itself out, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. There was no undoing it. Now there was more to hide than illegal logging. Now there were bodies. Instinct took over. He reverted to what he knew. He was a forester. He understood how nature conceals. With grim precision, he dismantled the scene. He rolled the tent. Collected every item. Packed the bodies into heavy construction bags taken from his truck. Nothing was left behind. Not even the illusion of a campsite. Hours passed as he erased every trace of human presence. When he was done, he drove away from the forest, carrying the weight of his actions with him. He searched for a place where evidence would disappear into anonymity. Then he remembered the construction site, where waste from across the region was dumped daily. He waited until nightfall. Drove in silence. Tossed the bags and the tent into a container, trusting that layers of debris would bury the truth forever. The remaining gear, he decided, could be disposed of later. Somewhere else. That choice sealed his fate. He had misjudged the police. And he had placed far too much faith in his own luck. After the confession, Stephen West led investigators back into the forest. There, beneath the quiet surface of a narrow stream, he showed them where he had discarded the pistol. The weapon was recovered, cold and rusted by water. Ballistic testing removed any remaining doubt. It was the same gun that had ended the lives of Jessica and Thomas. The final piece fell into place. In the end, the motive revealed itself as painfully small. Trivial. A man, terrified that a minor crime would cost him his position, chose to commit an unforgivable one instead. Fear, once allowed to rule, demanded a terrible price. Stephen West was convicted of the double murder. The court weighed every factor, including his full confession, and sentenced him to 45 years behind bars. What began as a quiet escape into nature for two people in love became a cautionary ending, one written not by fate or wilderness, but by paranoia. One man decided that protecting his life as he knew it mattered more than preserving two innocent lives. And for that choice, everything was lost.